Kathy Swartz. In December of 1988, in a small Michigan town called Three Rivers, a young man came home from work expecting his fiancée and their infant daughter. The apartment was quiet. He stepped inside and stopped. The walls had blood on them. There was a message left in blood on the wall. His fiancée was dead. The baby was alive in the next room, in her crib, untouched. The killer had walked out the door and disappeared into a winter morning, leaving behind a fingerprint on a pink telephone, a footprint in the bathroom, and DNA that would sit in evidence storage for 35 years. Kathy Sue Swartz was born May 24, 1969, and was 19 at her death. She had been raised on a 2-acre farm in Mendon, Michigan. She was a former Girl Scout, a 4-H member, and a student at Mendon High, described as a tomboy who loved hunting with her dad and was an exceptional artist. She was engaged to her boyfriend, Mike Warner. They had a 9-month-old daughter together named Courtney. She had her whole adult life still in front of her and a small apartment and a baby who was almost old enough to walk. On the morning of December 2nd, 1988, Kathy was killed inside apartment 102 at the Riverside Townhouses on East Hoffman Street in Three Rivers. Mike Warner left for work at 5:30 in the morning. He came home in the afternoon to a scene he later described to investigators. It was smeared all over. Walls, everywhere, like painted on. Kathy had been beaten and stabbed more than a dozen times. The killer had written, "I was here," on her wall in blood. Critically, 9-month-old Courtney was found unharmed in her crib in the next room. The baby was the only other person in the apartment that morning. How does a killer walk past a baby crying in a crib and just leave? Michigan State Police technicians recovered 3 crucial pieces of evidence: a bloody fingerprint on a pink telephone, a bloody footprint on the bathroom tile, and blood that was not Kathy's. Mike Warner was cleared by his alibi, and his fingerprint did not match. An ex-boyfriend was briefly held, but cleared. Police collected over 5,000 footprint samples over the years. The DNA was uploaded to CODIS. There were no matches. For 33 years, the file sat. In 2021, Western Michigan University's Cold Case program, under Dr. Ashlyn Kurston, began digitizing more than 10,000 documents. In 2022, MSP's Joel Schultz offered forensic genetic genealogy testing through a state cold case grant. Evidence was sent to Othram Inc. in the Woodlands, Texas, which used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a profile. Investigators narrowed the leads to 4 Waters brothers. 3 were eliminated. 1 name was left. Robert Odell Waters was 53 at his arrest. He had been just 18 at the time of the murder. He had attended Mendon High School with Kathy. He had been an elementary school friend of her fiancé, Mike Warner. He had been on the original 1988 suspect list, but only as 1 line in 10,000 pages of reports because he had moved to Phoenix, Arizona in September of 1988, 2 months before the killing. He had no criminal record. By 2023, he ran a successful plumbing business in Beaufort, South Carolina, with a wife and 2 children. He was arrested on April 30th, 2023. His fingerprint, his DNA, and his footprint all matched the scene. What does a man do, alone in a cell, when he realizes a 35-year-old secret has come home? On May 6th, 2023, 5 days after his arrest, Waters took his own life in his cell at the Beaufort County Detention Center. Records obtained by Target 8 show pamphlets in his cell titled "From Bitterness to Forgiveness" and "The Power of Forgiveness." The case was administratively closed. A BC's 2020 The Code Breakers aired in March of 2025, with David Muir featuring an interview with the now-grown Courtney Swartz, the daughter who had been in the crib that morning. She told Muir, "I have been living with this for 36 years. They solved this case with DNA, so I can close this book. But the next case would unfold in a Sunnyvale, California parking lot where a young woman waited at a bus stop just after midnight, and a stranger in a passing car decided he wanted her. Sarah Geer. In May of 1982, in the small Northern California town of Cloverdale, a young student walked from her best friend's house toward a downtown video arcade. It was a Sunday night, just before midnight. The walk was less than 10 minutes. She never made it. The next morning, 2 children playing in the backyard of an apartment building found her. The case became Cloverdale's first homicide on record. It would sit unsolved for 44 years. The break, when it finally came, would not come from a witness, a confession, or a tip. It would come from a discarded cigarette in a town 120 miles away. Sarah Ann Geer was a 7th grade student at Washington Junior High in Cloverdale, California, born February 13, 1969. She lived in a small yellow house on East 4th Street with her single mother, Susan Wilson Geer, a nurse at Manzanita Manor, working toward a nursing degree at Santa Rosa Junior College. Friends remembered her as tall and pretty. She was a fan of arcade pinball. Childhood friend Letitia McRae told the Press-Democrat, "Her picture sits in my living room to this day." On Sunday, May 23, 1982, Sarah was dropped off at her mother's home around 11 that night. She walked to her best friend Cheryl Evans' house on North Cloverdale Boulevard, then left at 11:30 for a downtown video arcade. She was accosted near an alley off 2nd Street, dragged to a secluded area, and killed. The next morning, her body was discovered behind an apartment building by 2 children playing in the backyard. It was Cloverdale's first homicide on record. How does a town of a few thousand people lose track of a young person walking 10 minutes between 2 houses? Cloverdale police questioned approximately 9 men in the initial weeks. A psychic was even consulted. Strikingly, the man who would eventually be convicted, James Unick, was himself interviewed shortly after the murder in 1982, denied involvement, and claimed he was with friends. He was let go. Investigators preserved Sarah's clothing, a tampon, and biological material from the scene, evidence that would sit in storage for the next 2 decades. Cloverdale itself, a town of just a few thousand at the time, was shaken in a way it had never been before. Parents would not let their children walk to school alone. The Geer family's small yellow house on East 4th Street became, for a while, the saddest address in town. In 2003, a California Department of Justice criminalist developed a male DNA profile from the preserved evidence. The profile was uploaded to CODIS. There were no hits. The case sat again. In July of 2021, then Cloverdale Police Chief Jason Ferguson reopened the case and brought in private investigator Kevin Kline. Between 2023 and 2024, the FBI's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Unit used familial genealogical databases to narrow the suspect to one of 4 Unick brothers. FBI agents conducted surveillance and collected a discarded cigarette from James Unick at his home in Willows, California. The lab matched the profile from 2003 at 630 trillion to 1. Could one cigarette, picked up off the sidewalk, really close a case that had been cold for 44 years? James Oliver Unick had been approximately 20 years old at the time of the murder. He had been in Cloverdale that night. He had been at the arcade. He had no prior sex offense convictions, which is why his DNA had never been in CODIS. By 2024, he lived in Willows, about 120 miles north of where Sarah had grown up. He was arrested on July 22, 2024. Trial began in January of 2026. On February 13, 2026, what would have been Sarah's 57th birthday, The jury found Unick guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances after just 2 hours of deliberation. Courtroom attendees collectively said happy birthday to Sarah. District Attorney Carla Rodriguez called it the coldest case ever presented to a Sonoma County jury. Sentencing was scheduled for April 23, 2026. Unick faces life without parole. Sarah's mother, Susan, who had spent decades waiting for an aunt's answer, died in 2016 without seeing the case solved. But the next case would put a child in a crib in the same room as a horror unfolding next door, and the only witness would be a baby too young to remember. Karen Stitt. In September of 1982, in Sunnyvale, California, a young Palo Alto high school student took a bus across town to see her boyfriend. They went to a 7-Eleven. They walked to a miniature golf course. They stayed at an elementary school playground, talking until almost midnight. Then he walked her back toward the bus stop and ran home to make his curfew. He was the last person who saw her alive. The next morning, a delivery truck driver pulled off El Camino Real and found her body 100 yards from the bench where she had been waiting for the bus. The case would sit for 40 years. The breakthrough would come from one detective who had grown up in that town and who had refused to stop looking. Karen Ann Stitt was born July 25, 1967, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After her mother's death, the family moved to Palo Alto, California, where Karen became a sophomore at Palo Alto High School. The Santa Clara District Attorney's Office described her as a spunky Pittsburgh transplant who quickly eased into the social life of Pali. Aunt Robin Stitt Morris said simply, Karen was bright and kind and beautiful. She was a fan of the rock band Rush. On Thursday, September 2, 1982, Karen took a bus 10 miles from Palo Alto to Sunnyvale to see her boyfriend, David Woods. They met at a 7-Eleven, walked to Golfland Miniature Golf, then to Ponderosa Elementary School. Around midnight, Woods walked her back toward the bus stop at El Camino Real and South Wolf Road. He ran home to make curfew. It was the last time anyone who loved her would see her. The next morning, a delivery truck driver found her body 100 yards from the bus stop, dumped at a 4-foot blood-stained cinder block wall. She had been stabbed many times, in an attack so violent that a number of the wounds had punctured her heart. How do you keep looking for an answer when every other detective in the county has moved on? Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety initially focused on the boyfriend, as detectives often do when a young woman is last seen with a partner. Investigators preserved biological material from the scene, including blood from the killer himself, who had cut himself on his own knife during the attack. In 2000, a male DNA profile was developed and conclusively cleared David Woods. There were no CODIS hits. The file went back into the cabinet. Karen's family kept her photographs out. Every September 2nd, they marked the day in private. Sunnyvale Detective Matt Hutchison, who had grown up in Sunnyvale himself, took on the case after the 2018 Golden State Killer arrest had reignited interest in genetic genealogy. Beginning in 2019, he worked with a forensic genetic genealogist. Funding came from a 2021 U.S. Department of Justice grant. In 2021, the genealogist identified 4 Ramirez brothers from Fresno. Hutchison covertly obtained DNA from one of Ramirez's daughter's trash cans in April of 2022, producing very strong statistical support. A confirmatory cheek swab in mid-2022 matched conclusively. Gary Jean Ramirez had been 35 at the time of the murder. He was 75 at his arrest on August 2nd, 2022, at his home in Makawao, Maui, Hawaii. He had served in the U.S. Air Force in the early 1970s. He had worked as a bug exterminator. He had no prior criminal record. He and Karen had never met. It had been a stranger crime. Detective Hutchison has said the brutality suggests Ramirez may have other victims still unidentified. What does it mean when a killer disappears into an ordinary life and stays there for 40 years? Ramirez was extradited in August of 2022. On February 24, 2025, he pleaded no contest to first-degree murder in Santa Clara County Superior Court. On May 12, 2025, he was sentenced to 25 years to life, eligible for parole at age 103. On January 9, 2026, ABC's 2020 Badass Detective aired, profiling Hutchison's work on this case and a related 1979 case in the same area. Karen's aunt, Robin Stitt Morris, attended the sentencing and addressed the courtroom directly, telling the man who had taken her niece that the family had waited 43 years for that moment. But the next case would happen along a Michigan bus route on a winter morning, where a young person left for school and never made it to the corner. Sherry Jo Elliott. In November of 1983, in Flint, Michigan, a young high school student left her house at 6:30 in the morning to walk to her bus stop. The walk was a few minutes. The bus stop was just down the road. She did not arrive. 4 days later, her body was found in a drainage ditch 40 miles north in a different county. There would be no break for 43 years. Police would suspect the wrong man for decades. The breakthrough would come not from a witness, not from a tip, not even from an arrest, but from an autopsy DNA sample taken from a man who had taken his own life as investigators were closing in on him. Sherry Jo Elliott was born March 27, 1967, in Charlotte, Michigan. At the time of her death, she was a junior at Carmen High School in Flint, living on Seneca Street with her mother Joyce Schultz and stepfather Robert Schultz. The WMU Cold Case program described her as shy and intelligent and always careful around strangers. She worked part-time as a babysitter. On November 16, 1983, around 6:30 in the morning, Sherry Jo left her Flint home to walk to her bus stop and never came home. It was a cold winter morning, dark with most of the neighborhood still asleep. The walk should have been a few minutes. The bus would have been a few minutes after that. 4 days later, on November 20th, her body was discovered in a drainage ditch along Muller Road in Blumfield Township, Saginaw County, about 40 miles north of Flint. She had been killed by gunshots. The autopsy summary later suggested she may have been kept alive until around November 19th, a detail that would haunt investigators for decades. How does a young person walking to a school bus get carried 40 miles in a different direction? For most of those decades, suspicion had landed on her stepfather. Joyce Schultz later said police had long suspected her own husband. They were always trying to say, "It was my husband." Robert Schultz died in 2025, just months before the case was actually solved. Biological evidence from the original 1983 investigation, including DNA, had been preserved. For the family, the silence was its own kind of weight. Joyce went on raising her younger children. Sherry's siblings grew up. The bus stop was still there. In 2023, the case was reopened by the Michigan State Police 3rd District Cold Case Unit, working with Western Michigan University's Cold Case program under Dr. Ashlyn Kuerston. Students Ella Bilkey and Christian Wang helped digitize the records, going page by page through 40-year-old reports. In 2025, evidence was sent to Othram Inc., which used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a profile. And traditional genealogical investigation narrowed the lead to one man, Ronnie Collins, 75, of Grand Blanc, Michigan. It was the 21st Othram solved case in Michigan. Ronnie Collins had been 33 at the time of the killing. He was a longtime Flint area bass guitarist nicknamed Hendrix and a traveling musician with the band The Goodfoot. Police did not believe he had any personal connection to Sherry Joe. Bar owner Lisa Baker called him one of the nicest guys she had ever met. Disturbingly, MSP later confirmed Collins had been questioned as a person of interest in the Halloween 1969 disappearance of two Oscoda young people, Pam Hobley and Patricia Spencer, a case that had also gone cold for more than half a century. What if a man can sit beside you in a small-town bar for 40 years and you never have any idea? As MSP closed in, Collins took his own life in January of 2026. DNA was collected at autopsy and matched the 1983 profile, which had sat in storage for 42 years. The case was officially announced solved on April 13, 2026 by MSP 3rd District. No prosecution will occur. Joyce Schultz said simply, "I am glad he's dead, but I am still processing all of this." The 1969 Oscoda disappearance is now an active line of inquiry, and detectives believe Collins' DNA could yet break open other unsolved cases across Michigan. But the next case would unfold inside a college dormitory at the edge of the Alaskan wilderness, where a young woman stepped out for a cigarette in the middle of the night and was found hours later in a bathtub. Sophie Sergey. In April of 1993, in Fairbanks, Alaska, a young woman was visiting a friend in a college dormitory. She had flown in for a dental appointment. She was sleeping on her friend's floor. Around 1 in the morning, she stepped out of the room to smoke a cigarette in the second-floor bathroom. She did not come back. Hours later, a janitor would find her body in a bathtub on the same floor. It would take 26 years, the arrest of a man living a normal life as a nurse in Maine, and a single DNA upload from his aunt to a free public database to bring the answer home. Sophie Sergey was a 20-year-old Yupik, Alaska native from Pitcairn Point, a village of about 70 people on the lower Yukon River. She was just 4 feet 9 inches tall. She dreamed of becoming a marine biologist. She had attended the University of Alaska Fairbanks for 2 years on a full scholarship before returning to Pitcairn Point in 1992 to earn money for jaw surgery, working as a teacher's aide and at the village store. She was a quiet person, focused, the kind of student professors remembered. On April 24, 1993, Sophie flew to Fairbanks for a Monday orthodontist appointment, staying with her friend Shirley Wasuli in Bartlett Hall at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Around 1 in the morning on April 26th, Sophie left Shirley's room to smoke a cigarette in the second-floor bathroom. She never returned. A janitor discovered her body in the bathtub around 2 in the afternoon. She had been attacked, stabbed in the face, gagged, shocked with a stun gun, and shot in the back of the head with a small-caliber firearm. The dorm filled with police. Students stood in the hallway. Nobody had heard a thing. How does a person disappear from a public bathroom in a busy university dorm in the middle of a school year? Investigators were hampered when more than 60 students moved out at semester's end, taking memories and witnesses with them. An 18-year-old freshman named Stephen Downs, who lived 1 floor up, was briefly interviewed. He deflected by suggesting GIS from Fort Wainwright may have been involved. DNA from preserved evidence was entered into CODIS in 2000 with no match. Downs' roommate, Nicholas Dazer, would later tell investigators that Downs had owned a small-caliber Harrington and Richardson revolver in 1993, the same kind of firearm used in the killing. After the 2018 Golden State Killer arrest, retired Alaska State Trooper Randy McFerrin submitted the unknown DNA to Parabon Nano Labs in July of 2018. Chief Genetic Genealogist C.C. Moore built a family tree from DNA that Downs' aunt in Vermont had voluntarily uploaded to the free public database GED Match. The aunt's profile showed about 23% overlap, consistent with a nephew. Moore's December 18, 2018 report identified Stephen Downs. A confirmatory cheek swab on February 14, 2019, produced a 1 in 330 billion match. Stephen Harris Downs was 44 at his arrest. He had been 18 at the time of the killing. He had been a 1992 graduate of Edward Little High School in Auburn, Maine, and a UAF nursing student in 1993. After college, he had moved back to Maine and become a registered nurse. He had a wife. He had children. He had no personal connection to Sophie. He was arrested on February 15, 2019, in Auburn, in front of neighbors who had known him for years. How do you tell a community their neighborhood nurse, the man who had taken their blood pressure for years, may have been someone else entirely? Trial began January 12, 2022. On February 10, 2022, Downs was found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault. It was Alaska's first conviction by jury via investigative genetic genealogy. He was sentenced on September 27, 2022 to 75 years, 67 for the killing plus 8 mandatory years for the assault. He is currently incarcerated at Goose Creek Correctional Center. On April 21, 2025, the Alaska Court of Appeals heard oral arguments on his appeal, challenging the use of investigative genetic genealogy as a possible violation of Alaska's constitutional right to privacy. As of April 2026, the court has not yet issued a ruling. Sophie's family in Pitcairn Point, the village of 70 people on the Yukon River, has lived through 26 years without an answer, and the long uncertainty of a conviction that may yet be appealed away. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. But the next case would unfold along a Georgia interstate, where a young woman from Michigan was found in a roadside ditch and would lie in an unmarked grave for 34 years before anyone could even tell the world her name. Stacy Lynn Chahorsky. In December of 1988, on the eastern shoulder of a northbound interstate near Rising Fawn, Georgia, 2 Department of Transportation employees pulled over to clear what they thought was debris. It wasn't debris. It was the body of a young woman. There was no identification on her. No purse. No driver's license. No one in Dade County, Georgia knew who she was. Local investigators called her Rising Fawn Jane Doe. She would lie in an unmarked grave for the next 34 years. The case is now a landmark in American forensic science. The first time investigative genetic genealogy was used to identify both the victim and the killer in the same case. Stacy Lynn Chahorsky was a 19-year-old from Norton Shores, Michigan, in Muskegon County. She had been traveling and hitchhiking through the southeastern United States in the autumn of 1988. Her mother, Mary Beth Smith, reported her missing on January 17, 1989. The last contact between mother and daughter had been a phone call on September 15, 1988, when Stacy said she was somewhere in the Carolinas. After that, the calls stopped. On December 16, 1988, 2 Georgia DOT employees discovered a young woman's body on the eastern shoulder of northbound I-59 near Rising Fawn in Dade County, Georgia. She had been killed and dumped within the previous week. There was nothing on her to say who she was. Mary Beth Smith continued calling police back in Michigan, asking for any update on her daughter, while her daughter lay 700 miles away. How long can a young person be missing before the world simply stops looking? GBI, forensic artist. Marla Lawson prepared composite drawings and clay renderings. Without identification, leads dried up. The Jane Doe was buried in an unmarked grave in Lake Hills Memorial Gardens in Trenton, Georgia. Norton Shores Police, hundreds of miles away, collected a fingerprint card from Stacy's relatives in 2010, hoping it might one day match an unidentified person somewhere. GBI Special Agent Joe Montgomery took over in 2005 and developed a male DNA profile of the suspect. There were no CODIS hits. The Jane Doe stayed Jane Doe. GBI Agent Adam Jones learned of the technique that had cracked the Golden State Killer case. The FBI partnered with Othram Inc., which extracted DNA from Stacy's skeletal remains using forensic-grade genome sequencing. FBI genealogists in Atlanta and Baltimore traced the family tree back to Norton Shores, Michigan. The 2010 fingerprint card confirmed the match. On March 24, 2022, the woman who had been buried as Rising Fawn Jane Doe finally had her name back: Stacy Lynn Chahorsky. Othram then ran the killer's preserved DNA through the same pipeline. Othram returned a positive result on June 13, 2022. On September 6, 2022, the FBI and GBI announced Henry Frederick Wise as the killer. FBI Special Agent in Charge Kerry Farley called it the first time investigative genealogy was used to identify both the victim and the killer in the same case. How does the same technology in the same case give a name to both the lost and the one who took her? Henry Frederick Wise, known as Hoss or Hank, had been 34 at the time of the killing. He was originally from Mount Clemens, Michigan, and in 1988 had been a long-haul trucker for Western Carolina Trucking Company, with a route through Chattanooga, Birmingham, and Nashville passing directly through Dade County. He had a multi-state criminal record: theft, assault, obstruction, but none of his arrests had required DNA collection. He was also a stunt car driver. He died on May 26, 1999, at age 44, after a stunt car at Myrtle Beach Speedway burst into flames. The case is a landmark. Wise's DNA is now in CODIS, where it can be cross-checked against open highway corridor cases. The FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative has cataloged more than 750 victims linked to long-haul truckers. District Attorney Chris Arndt said simply, "Although we can't bring him to human justice, he's been facing the ultimate justice for some number of years now." Stacy's remains were exhumed from Lake Hills Memorial Gardens and returned home for reburial near her family. But the next case would not be a homicide at all, but a question that had haunted a Canadian family for 16 years, ending with a single sneaker washing up on a Washington state beach. Jeff Sertel. In the late hours of an April night in 2007, in the Fraser Valley city of Mission, British Columbia, a young high school student left his family home on his blue bicycle. His parents were asleep. He took almost nothing with him. The next morning, he was gone. The family searched. Police searched. Friends searched. He was never found. 16 months later, on a beach in Washington state, 100 miles south, a beachgoer found a sneaker washed up on the sand. It contained a sock and a human foot. Nobody connected the two cases for the next 16 years. The breakthrough would come from a small crowdfunding campaign and an uncle's DNA and a quiet cross-border database query that should have happened decades earlier. Jeff Stuart Sertel was 17 at his disappearance from Mission, British Columbia, a Fraser Valley city about 70 kilometers east of Vancouver. He attended Hatsick Secondary School. His parents were Gary and Dawn Sertel. He was 6 feet 1 inch tall, with brown hair and brown eyes, and several moles on the left side of his cheek. He left the house on his blue CCM bicycle with yellow forks. Around midnight on April 28th and 29th, 2007, Jeff was last seen by neighbors leaving his home. He was wearing dark blue jeans, a navy hoodie, and black running shoes. His parents, asleep at the time, found him gone the next morning. He had left most of his belongings behind. His family considered the late-night departure out of character. Mission RCMP led the Canadian investigation. There were no obvious leads. The case went cold quickly. What happens to a missing person in a small Canadian town when the trail goes cold within 48 hours? On August 5th, 2008, a beachgoer near the former Silver King Resort west of Port Angeles, Washington, discovered a Black Everest brand size 11 sneaker containing a Levi's tube sock and a mostly skeletonized human right foot. It was the sixth detached human foot found in the broader Salish sea feet phenomenon, and the first found outside British Columbia. Between 2007 and 2025, more than 20 disarticulated human feet, often inside running shoes, washed up on the shores of the Salish Sea, leading to wild speculation in the international press about a possible serial killer. Clallam County Sheriff's Office investigated the foot discovery. Mission RCMP investigated Jeff's disappearance. The two cases sat in parallel for 16 years without connecting. Crucially, the U.S. databases queried by Clallam County did not include Canadian missing persons records. The two files lived 100 miles apart and never spoke to each other. In 2023, Clallam County partnered with Othram Inc., which used forensic-grade genome sequencing on the skeletonized bone. Funding came from a DNA Solves crowdfunding campaign that raised about $7,500. Money put together by ordinary people online who wanted answers for a family they had never met. Forensic genetic genealogy linked the profile to Jeff Sertel's uncle. The British Columbia Coroner's Service independently confirmed the identification. Could a small online fundraiser, raised dollar by strangers, do what national databases on both sides of a border could not? The Sertel family announced the news publicly on March 6, 2025. A joint mission RCMP and Clallam County press release followed on March 11, 2025. There is no identified suspect. There is no killer. The mainstream forensic theory, supported by Simon Fraser University entomologist Gail Anderson, is that decomposing bodies in cold marine water naturally disarticulate at the ankle, and modern athletic shoes float feet-long distances on currents. This implies Jeff most likely entered the water on the night of April 29, 2007, with his body carried by currents into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Investigators on both sides of the border have stated there is no indication of criminality, though they have not ruled it out. The case remains unsolved as a what happened question. Mission RCMP, Corporal Harrison Moore said simply, "There are no further investigative avenues to follow up on." The Sertel family statement read, "While the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unsolved, we are thankful to finally have closure. But the next case would close a door on one of the most notorious killers in American history, with a DNA match that connected a vial of blood drawn before his execution to a young Utah student missing for half a century." Laura Ann Aim. On Halloween night of 1974 in the small Utah town of Lehi, a young high school student left a Halloween gathering and walked into town alone. She was last seen at a local cafe around midnight, then walking toward a park. She did not come home. Her body was found a month later, on Thanksgiving Day, in American Fork Canyon. The case sat for over 50 years, with one name whispered in every interview file, but never quite proven. In April of 2026, a single CODIS hit confirmed what investigators had suspected for half a century. The man who had taken her was Theodore Robert Bundy. Laura Ann Aim was born on August 21, 1957, in Lehi, Utah, the second of 6 children of James Aim and Shirlene Tolton Aim. The family lived on a farm in Fairview, Utah, in San Pete County. She attended North San Pete High School. She had dropped out by the autumn of 1974, partly due to teasing about her height. She was a tomboy and a gifted athlete who played softball and rode horses with the Silver Spurs Club. Her sister Michelle Impala said simply, "She was very passionate about animals." She took me everywhere. On the night of Halloween, October 31st, 1974, Laura attended a Halloween gathering in the Lehigh area, then left alone after 10 in the evening. An acquaintance dropped her at the Knotty Pine Cafe in Lehigh around midnight. She walked to Robinson Park in American Fork. That was the last confirmed sighting. On Thanksgiving Day, November 28, 1974, 2 Brigham Young University geology students found her body down an embankment off American Fork Canyon Road. She had been killed in an attack so violent, her father could only identify her by barbed wire scars on her arm. How does a name sit in police files for 50 years without ever being formally written into the verdict? Laura's case was the first for Utah County's newly formed detective division. Just 8 days after she vanished, Carol DeRonch survived an attempted abduction at Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. Bundy was arrested in August of 1975, driving a Volkswagen Beetle containing a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, an ice pick, and a crowbar. He was convicted of DeRonch's kidnapping in March of 1976. In 1977, Laura's friend Marin Beveridge picked Bundy out of a photo lineup, telling investigators he had been stalking Laura for weeks. Despite this, Utah County concluded the evidence was insufficient to charge him. The autopsy on Laura had found minimal decomposition, suggesting she had been kept alive for days. Disturbingly, her hair had been freshly shampooed after death, a detail consistent with Bundy's documented post-mortem rituals in his other known cases. The breakthrough is recent. In early 2025, Utah County Cold Case Detective Jake Hall and Sergeant Mike Reynolds ordered retesting. The Utah State Crime Lab, using new genotyping technology acquired in 2023, isolated a single male DNA profile from the original 1974 swabs and uploaded it to CODIS. In March of 2026, Florida authorities, which had Bundy's profile from a 1978 vial of his blood, notified Utah of a CODIS match. Theodore Robert Bundy had been admitted to the University of Utah Law School in August of 1974, 2 months before Laura vanished. He lived at a small apartment in Salt Lake City. He had confessed to her killing on January 22, 1989, in a 90-minute interview with retired Salt Lake City detective Dennis Couch, 2 days before his execution at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. The confession had been on file for 37 years. The DNA match made it official. The case was officially closed on April 1st, 2026, by Utah County Sheriff Mike Smith. Sister Michelle Impala said at the press conference, "I know that Laura would be really happy to know that it has been closed, and just to know that Ted Bundy is gnashing his teeth in hell. Both parents are deceased. The full Bundy DNA profile is now available to other agencies." Sheriff Smith hinted another Utah Bundy cold case is close to closing, and Wyoming is reconsidering Bundy-linked cases. But the next case would unfold not in a remote canyon, but in a busy Maryland shopping mall, where a young high school junior drove off in her family's car to buy something for the homecoming dance and was never seen alive again. Pamela Conyers. On a Friday night in October of 1970, in Glen Burnie, Maryland, a 16-year-old high school junior left the homecoming pep rally and drove to a local mall. She was buying shoe polish to match the dress she planned to wear to the dance the next night. The mall was less than a 15-minute drive. She didn't come home. 3 days later, the family's gold-brown Dodge Monaco was found abandoned on a stretch of road still under construction. Her body was found a few yards away. The case would sit for over half a century. The breakthrough would not just identify the man who had killed her, but a second man who had also been in the car, leaving DNA on a cigarette and a fingerprint on the door. Pamela Lynn Conyers was born January 13, 1954. She lived in the 8,000 block of Twin Ridge Drive in Glen Burnie, Maryland, in Anne Arundel County. She was a junior at Glen Burnie High School, where she played flute in the school band and took trigonometry. Classmate Michael Golden, who attended the 2023 press conference holding his old high school yearbook, said, "I had trigonometry class with her. I still mourn her death. I got to be old. She didn't. She's forever 16." On Friday, October 16th, 1970, Pamela attended the Glen Burnie High Homecoming Bonfire and Pep Rally. Around 8:15 that evening, she drove the family's gold-brown 1967 Dodge Monaco to Harrendale Mall to buy shoe polish for her homecoming dress. She never came home. On October 19th, officers found the abandoned Dodge Monaco near Mountain Road and what is now Maryland Route 100, a stretch then under active construction. On October 20th, her body was found 20 to 30 yards from the car in a pine thicket. She had been killed by strangulation. What does a parent do after 50 years when the door has stayed quiet that long? Anne Arundel County Police collected biological material from the scene, cigarettes from inside the car, and latent fingerprints from outside the car. DNA was first uploaded to CODIS in 1996 with no hits. The case sat as one of the department's oldest unsolved homicides for over 5 decades. The case was solved in 2 phases through investigative genetic genealogy by the FBI Baltimore Field Office and Othram. In March of 2023, the FBI built a family tree from the suspect's DNA and identified Forrest Clyde Williams III. Williams's latent fingerprint from the car exterior was also re-identified in 2022 thanks to upgraded federal databases. Then in March of 2024, detectives noticed a second unidentified male DNA profile on cigarettes inside the Monaco. AACOPD submitted that evidence to Othram, which used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a profile that the FBI traced to Donald Willard. Could 2 men, 50 years apart, both finally be named in the same case? Forrest Clyde Williams III had been 21 in 1970. He was originally from Virginia, had attended Northeast High School in Pasadena, Maryland, and was described as a drifter working side jobs as a carpenter. He died of natural causes in March of 2018 at age 69 at an assisted living center in Salem, Virginia. Donald Willard had been 31 in 1970. He had been a handyman working for Haverhill Contracting Company, the company building Maryland Route 100 at the very site where Pamela's car and body were dumped. Both men were hunters. Both were known to drink at the now-closed Mountain Bar on Mountain Road. He died of natural causes in 2010 at age 74. Police don't know whether the men knew each other or whether either knew Pamela. The case is considered solved but officially open because both suspects are dead. Williams was named on March 10th, 2023. Willard was named on March 18th, 2024. The family has consistently asked for privacy. Police continue to seek information about whether either man committed other crimes. The fact that 2 unrelated DNA profiles sat in the same car for 54 years, both eventually identifiable through forensic genetic genealogy, has become a textbook example of what the technology can do, and a quiet reminder of how many other unsolved cases may yet have an answer waiting in storage. But the next case would be the last on this list, and the most personal, where a brother who had become a professional musician would learn, after 46 years, who had taken his sister. Carol Sue Klaber. On a Friday evening in June of 1976, in the city of Fort Wright, Kentucky, a young high school student left home telling her family she was going to eat supper with friends. Witnesses saw her in a local park, dropping off her bicycle and getting into a car with a sandy blonde-haired man. The next morning, a dentist driving to work spotted her body in a roadside ditch in the next county over. The case would sit for 46 years, unsolved. The detective who carried the file the longest would die just months before the case was finally cracked. The breakthrough would come from a hair preserved at the scene, sequenced 4 decades later, and an emotional phone call from a Kentucky detective to a brother in Cleveland who played bass trombone for a living. Carol Sue Klaber was a high school student from Fort Wright, Kentucky, in the greater Cincinnati area, who had just completed her junior year at Dixie Heights High School. Her father had died of a heart ailment in 1970. She had 2 older brothers, Charles and Thomas. Thomas Klaber would go on to become the retired bass trombonist for the Cleveland Orchestra. Carol was deeply musical. She had taken piano lessons since she was 5. She loved her acoustic guitar. Her piano teacher had selected her to perform at the Taft Museum in Cincinnati. She volunteered as a candy striper at St. Charles Nursing Home. On the evening of Friday, June 4th, 1976, Carol left home saying she was going to eat supper with friends. Witnesses saw her in Devou Park dropping off her bicycle and getting into a car with a sandy blonde-haired man. The car was described variously as a Chevrolet Monte Carlo or a Pontiac Grand Prix. The next morning, June 5th, around 8 in the morning, a dentist driving on Chambers Road in Walton, Kentucky, in Boone County, spotted her body in a roadside ditch. She had been killed in a brutal attack using an object similar to a tire iron. How does a single hair, preserved in a paper envelope for 4 decades, finally tell its story? Kentucky State Police Detective Jerry Keith worked the case for nearly a decade as the primary investigator. Original investigators preserved the suspect's DNA, including a hair, and 2 of the suspect's fingerprints from the scene. Keith carried the case file with him for the rest of his life. He died in September of 2017, just months after a new cold case team had formed. He never lived to see the answer. In 2017, the Boone County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, under Sheriff Michael Helmig, adopted the case. Detective Coy Cox and Detective Tim Adams worked it together. In 2019, Kentucky State Police extracted an unknown male DNA profile from the preserved hair. In September of 2022, evidence was sent to Othram for forensic-grade genome sequencing, funded by the nonprofit Season of Justice. On January 23, 2023, Othram identified Thomas W. Dunaway. In February of 2023, detectives located Dunaway's daughter, whose DNA confirmed a 100% parent and child match to the crime scene profile. Thomas W. Dunaway had been originally from Park Hills, Kentucky, and had been 19 at the time of the killing. He lived approximately a half-mile from Devou Park and a mile and a half from the Klaber residence. He drove a 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo matching witness descriptions and disposed of the vehicle shortly after Carol's body was found. Just 9 days later, on June 14, 1976, Dunaway enlisted in the U.S. Army. He went absent without leave that December. While AWOL, he shot and killed Ronald Townsend, a young man of his own age. Dunaway was convicted of Townsend's killing and sentenced to life, but was released after roughly 7 years. He died in 1990 at age 33 of undisclosed causes. The case was closed and cleared at the local level on March 8, 2023. Boone County Commonwealth's attorney, Lewis Kelly, declined a posthumous indictment, but stated, "If Thomas Dunaway were still alive, I believe there now exists sufficient evidence to prove that he murdered Carol Sue Klaber, beyond a reasonable doubt." Detective Cox obtained a court order to exhume Dunaway's body to upload his DNA to CODIS. Carol's mother had passed away approximately 5 weeks before the case was reopened. Brother Thomas Klaber, the only living sibling, was personally informed by Detective Cox in Cleveland on roughly March 1st, 2023. Cox described Thomas's reaction. He had said, simply, "I have closure." This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.